Welcome back, everyone. My name is Colton Zirkle. I am the Education and Communications Coordinator at the Conservation Federation of Missouri, and I would like to welcome you all to the second installment of our Hunting Basics web series. So here at the start, we're going to have Carrie Swain give a brief introduction to the Artemis program. So I will let her tell you all what that is.
Hi everyone, I am Artemis's Missouri ambassador, and it is an initiative of the National Wildlife Federation. It's a group for women who want to be involved in conservation, hunting, and angling, and we put on a lot of events throughout the year. We have a river cleanup coming up September 11th here in the Kansas City area. I'm out of Kansas City, but it's a great group. Every skill level is welcome, new hunters, experienced hunters, and it's just a great way to meet other women who enjoy all of the same things that I do and you do. If we have a Facebook page, it's Artemis Sportswomen Missouri, and if anybody would like to join, we post all of the events on there and anything Artemis has going on. Artemis is out of Wyoming, that's where they started, and we have ambassadors all over the United States. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me on our Facebook group, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We're excited to get that program up and growing and off the ground. So we appreciate you joining us this evening, and hope people will look into your group.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah. With that, I will introduce our speaker for this evening. That is Zach Morris, who is Vice President of the Conservation Federation of Missouri. He works at a mitigation company called Decoy, that is located here in central Missouri. And he is one of our founding members of the Young Professionals Group. And as a waterfowler that's introduced himself into this, he has a lot of great insight to share with us, especially those who are beginners, but also those who have some experience. So Zach, with that, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you, Colton, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for being here. I see some new names in the chat, so welcome. And we're going to dive right into this because there's no such thing as basic waterfowl hunting that can be covered in 30 minutes. So I will try to be thorough, but if I skip something or you have questions, let me know at the end. We will start at the beginning, which is, what do you need to go duck hunting? Waterfowling can be a little bit gear intensive relative to other types of hunting. So we're going to go over the basics of what you absolutely have to have if you're going to go out in the field and be successful. Well, you need waders. Carved waterfowl, for a reason, you're going to have to get in the water. So get a pair of waders. You notice I didn't say get a good pair of waders because expensive waders tear just as easily as cheap waders. And as long as you can find a cheap pair that has a warranty, then you don't need to worry about normal wear and tear breaking them down, and you can go get those replaced. But I do highly recommend insulated waders, neoprene type material. It's a kind of a wetsuit type material. Sometimes they're padded with more insulation in the boots in particular, because waterfowling also takes place in the winter. You're going to be out in cold water, and so that extra layer of insulation really helps. But as you're just starting out, don't feel like you need to break the bank and buy $400 pair of waders. You should be able to get some decent quality for around $100 on sale at the beginning of the season with a warranty, so that if they break through normal wear and tear, because waterfowlers are kind of hard on their gear, you should be able to get those replaced. You need a shotgun. It's legal in Missouri to hunt waterfowl with any shotgun smaller than 10 gauge. Most hunters use a 12 gauge, and that's what I would recommend as well. Though if you want to hunt with a 20 gauge, I know hunters that do that as well and are very successful with that. You do have to shoot non-toxic ammunition to hunt waterfowl. Typically people shoot steel, though there are more expensive alternatives like bismuth that have a higher density and theoretically are more lethal, but number 3 steel shot is a great all-around choice. I recommend if you have a shotgun that shoots 3-inch shells to shoot 3-inch number 3s. That's a great all-around load for everything from teal up to small geese even. If you're hunting specifically for geese, you might choose a number 2 or even larger size shot, but your 3-inch number 3s will cover 90% of any duck or goose hunting that you would do in the state. And you gotta have decoys. You don't have to have decoys to hunt ducks. There are some old traditionalists that will pond jump if you have access to some private ponds where birds are roosted on. But typically hunters in Missouri are hunting over decoys. It lets the birds get in close enough to you that you can make an ethical shot and identify the bird. But to start off with, you can find a cheap dozen mallard decoys either on a clearance rack somewhere or with a preseason sale, or even secondhand from Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, and that's a great place to start. And make sure you have appropriate cold weather gear. Out of everything here, if you're going to spend money on gear, get yourself a good waterproof coat and a waterproof set of gloves and a waterproof flashlight, because anywhere you go when you're waterfowl hunting, everything is going to get wet. Even if you have your waders and your waterproof gear, the outside of your clothing and your waders are going to be wet. So anything you handle with your gloves is going to get wet. So it's that high quality, warm gear. It's going to keep the water off because as cold as it can be sometimes out walking around, if you're sitting still in the water, you really want to have those layers of insulation to make sure that you don't get too cold. Also very important to know the regulations. Waterfowl are managed on an international level with treaties between the US and Canada and Mexico, and our regulations are set by the Fish and Wildlife Service and enforced by the Conservation Department. They do change from year to year as populations fluctuate from certain species. Generally, unless something drastic changes, you're allowed to shoot 6 ducks in a day, but those limits vary by species. And so you need to know what that is from year to year. You also want to check the shooting times of where you're hunting. You need to know when sunrise is. You can start shooting a half hour before that, but a lot of conservation areas in Missouri close to hunting at 1 p.m. So make sure that you know the area regulations before you go out. Where to hunt? Fortunately, in Missouri, we have a lot of great waterfowling destinations. On the map on the right, you will see each of those green marks is an MDC managed waterfowl area. These are conservation areas that are managed specifically for waterfowl hunting. And the great thing about these is you don't have to compete with other people for a spot, as in you don't have to get there early and beat someone else. They have a draw system where you can either ahead of the season register and get drawn for a particular day, or show up on that day and enter what they call the pour line, where everybody lines up and takes a number out of a box. And if you get a low enough number, you get to pick a hunting spot that day. So that means there's no crowding, there's adequate distance between parties, and everybody has an equal chance when they show up for the draw. Another great benefit for these areas for beginners, if you're just getting into waterfowl hunting, is the staff are very knowledgeable. These guys work these areas year round, managing them to produce waterfowl and provide habitat. And if you get into a certain hunting spot, they're going to be able to point at a map, show you how to walk in, where the best place to access it is, where to set up to hunt the ducks. And so they take a lot of that work out of the equation for you, so you don't have to be super knowledgeable about the area, because there will be other folks that can point you in the right direction. There are tons of other conservation areas in the state with waterfowl hunting opportunities. Best way to look at those is to go on the MDC's website, look at their conservation area atlas, and sort by areas that allow duck hunting. And then you can also filter by distance from where you live and start picking out areas you may want to go check out. It's always advisable to scout those areas ahead of time, see if there's actually water, see if the ducks are using it and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of opportunity out there available. If you're hunting open conservation areas where there's no draw, it's first come, first serve. So keep in mind that you may want to show up early, like really early when these areas open at 4 a.m. To make sure that you get your spot staked out, and have a backup plan, because I've never been to a duck hunting spot in Missouri where I didn't see evidence of someone else that had hunted there before. So there's no secret spot on public land in Missouri that I've been able to find. So keep in mind that there may be someone else in a spot that you plan to hunt when you get there. Be respectful and don't crowd them. This isn't dove season where you can sit 50 yards from the next guy and both enjoy your hunt. You need a lot of room to waterfowl hunt effectively, and so you should have a backup plan so that if you show up to one area and someone is already where you plan to hunt, you know where you're going to go instead of crowding in on them. There are other areas you can hunt that are public land that are not owned by the conservation department. Reservoirs and streams are a great place to look as well. Most of our reservoirs in Missouri, especially those in Southwest Missouri, have a lot of Corps of Engineers managed land around them, and that is all open to hunting with some exceptions. So make sure you check the regulations, because some of them have waterfowl refuges and other areas like that. But those can be a great place to shoot ducks, especially as the weather starts to get cold and small water starts to freeze up. The ducks will concentrate on those big reservoirs. Streams and rivers are another great place to go. You can put in at a boat ramp and paddle up and down river. And as long as that flows through public land, you shouldn't run into any issues there. So once you've got a spot picked out on public land, maybe you know somebody with a farm pond, or you got a family member or a neighbor who owns some land. Keep an eye out on those farm ponds for ducks. Sometimes even flooded fields, if we get a late season flood, or even flooded drainage ditches that have good vegetation around the borders can have ducks. Drainage ditches can be good hunting during teal season, because teal tend to key in on small waters. If you are going to hunt something like that on private land, make sure you get permission, whether that's from your friends and family that you know, or if you drive around and see geese or ducks using somebody's pond. Some people will go knock on the door and ask for permission, and a lot of folks are open to allowing people onto their property to hunt, and some aren't. So be respectful and don't badger people if they say no. And if they say yes, consider sharing some of your harvest with them or helping them out with some farm work so that they know that you're appreciative. Similarly, on private land, dry cornfields can be good late into the season. Mallard ducks in particular and geese will feed on cut cornfields. That does involve a little more gear than most people will have if they're just starting out. But if you see geese or ducks keying in on a field, you might go see if you can get permission to hunt there and make a good hunt of it. In general, and this is a very brief summation of a conversation that could take an hour, you want to hunt food sources or loafing areas that have cover that you can hide in. Food sources, that's obvious. Ducks get up in the morning, they go eat. So whether that's a flooded cornfield or a marsh with some natural vegetation that those birds are going to eat, or even a pin oak pond where they're going to be eating on acorns, that's where those birds are going to go first thing in the morning. And then loafing areas are areas where birds will go to rest. That's your farm ponds, your little bit more open water, and ponds that have a lot of shelter around them, willows or pin oaks growing, will tend to hold birds in the middle part of the day, especially if there's inclement weather. So that's generally what you want to look for. If you do go to one of the managed waterfowl areas, there'll be people there that really know the area that can point you out right exactly where you want to hunt. Wherever you end up hunting, scouting ahead of time is a good idea. That means going and checking out your spot and seeing if there are ducks there and deciding how you want to approach hunting it. And this can happen preseason with looking for spots that might have ducks later, and this can happen the night before you want to go see if birds are using the area. Generally, it's a good idea to scout first thing in the morning or late in the evening when birds are feeding. Because if you see birds using it at that time of day, chances are they'll be using it again first thing in the morning when you would be hunting. When you are scouting places, don't just look and see if birds are using a body of water, but look at what specific habitat that they're using, because you can miss where the ducks are trying to use by 30 yards and you'll have a much worse hunt than if you're right on the spot that the ducks are trying to get to, whether that's a food source or typically it'll be a food source, but it might be some cover that they're keying in on in the middle of the day or something like that. You want to be on the X, as duck hunters call it, which is that very specific spot where the ducks want to be. It's a lot less work if you can be where the ducks want to go instead of being next door trying to convince them to come to you. And anytime you're scouting, look for places to hide. I'm going to say that a lot. Hiding, getting in good cover is probably the most important thing you can do when you're duck hunting. And so if you see ducks using a pond, but there's no cover around it, it's probably not going to be a great place to hunt. So look for another area nearby that the ducks might use with some cover, and you probably have a better chance. I also highly recommend that when you're scouting, you check the water depth, and do that during the daytime when it's not 20 degrees and dark outside, because that can create a pretty dangerous situation if you walk off into the water for the first time at 4 o'clock in the morning when you've never been there before. On those managed waterfowl areas, those are going to be shallow water. You're going to be safe to walk. They will tell you where to go. You're going to be safe to wade off into those marshes, not having ever been there before. But if you're hunting somewhere and you don't know what the depth is like, you don't know if there's submerged timber or a tree that fell over or a rock or something like that, you don't want to trip and fall in the water when it's 20 degrees outside. So I highly recommend when you go scout, take your waders with you. You find a spot you think you want to hunt, put your waders on and wade out there. See how easy it is to access. Think about how deep the water is and where you might want to set decoys based on water depth and based on recovering your birds. If you don't have a dog, you need to know that the water is shallow enough to wade out to where you might drop a bird, or come up with some contingency plan, which is maybe if it's a small body of water, those birds will wash up on the far shoreline and you can access them from over there. But think about all those things as you're scouting so that you don't ruin your hunt by falling in the water or realizing that you can't recover your birds. Also, keep in mind weather conditions. If you see ducks using an area on a bad weather day, they may not be there on a good weather day. So you might file that spot away for next time. Hey, next time it's raining, I'm going to go hunt this spot because the ducks were hiding in the cover there. Once you pick out your spot, how do you hunt ducks? Most important thing you can do is to hide. A duck can see you from a long way away, and a duck has really good vision. So you want to have cover in front of you, you want to have cover behind you, and you want to have cover above you, over your head, because that bird is going to be up in the sky, not flying in at 6 feet off the water. Couple of pointers for hiding. On a sunny day, it can be easier to hide because you can get into the shadows. So if you can get into the shadow of a tree or whatever cover you're hiding behind, that will take the sun off your face. It will put more contrast in there. You hide in the shadows and you won't stick out as much. Most important thing you could do, whether it's sunny or cloudy or otherwise, is to hold still. Because if you get back in enough cover and you're wearing camo and you keep your head down, you'll blend in with your surroundings pretty well. As long as you're not moving around or making noise, those ducks should feel confident coming in. And one thing that I've noticed a lot of beginner duck hunters struggle with is don't look up, which is really hard to do. As the birds are flying in, you want to look at them. But if you turn your face up, that is the most visible part of your body. Everything else is covered in camo or behind cover. But when you look at those birds, sun hits your face, it lights up, and that's going to flare those birds off. So practice keeping your head down, kind of swiveling your head back and forth and looking out of your periphery to see where the ducks are, and even being able to hear as the birds come close. You'll start to learn when you should look up and begin to shoot. But if you can do that, if you can hide really well, then that's going to set you up for success. Always try to set up with the wind from behind you or off of one of your shoulders. If the wind is in your face, you're going to have a hard time shooting because ducks always land into the wind. So you want, ideally, the wind at your back, and the ducks will be landing straight in front of you. It makes shooting easier, and it also lets those birds get in closer and give you a better chance to ID them, get an ethical shot. If they're coming over from behind you, you're going to have a hard time seeing them, or you might have to stand up and turn around, and then they're going to see you, and then, or they'll fly right over the top of you and see you, and so that's not an ideal situation. When you set your decoys, try to make it look natural. If you've been scouting and seeing birds swim around, you'll kind of see how much space to put in between them and that sort of thing. But the general key here is to leave enough room for the ducks to land. That can mean leaving an open spot in the middle and putting decoys around the edges, or just putting a big blob of decoys out that are spaced 6 to 10 feet apart so that there's a lot of room between them. If you're learning to duck call, I recommend calling either just a little bit or not at all and seeing how the birds respond. If birds are decoying without you having to call, don't call. Even if you're an expert, if I can get birds to decoy without having to use my calls, it's great. It's less work on my part, and I'm less likely to mess it up or to have a squeaky call or anything like that that would spook the birds off. And especially if you're just learning the duck call, you're more likely to mess it up by making a bad noise than you are to really bring those birds in by making the right noise. And as you are starting to practice calling and learning more and getting confident in that, just don't call when the ducks are looking right at you. Call when they're circling or when they're flying away, because if they're over the top of you or looking straight at you, then when you call, they'll know exactly where you're sitting and they'll look at you and pick you out of your cover. So that's a general rule of thumb for calling. Be minimal about it, and then don't call if it's going to make the ducks see you. Shooting. You do everything right. You want to make sure that you're able to shoot successfully. A lot of people make the mistake with waterfowl is shooting when they're too far away. You want to shoot those birds inside 30 yards. So set your decoys up where you think you might want to shoot. And as far as the bird gets over your decoys, you know about how close it is. That's why we hunt over decoys, is to get those birds in close so we can identify them and make a clean shot. And then with any wing shooting, you want to lead the bird. This is pretty basic if you've done any shooting, but shoot in front of it. Shoot where it's going to be when it's moving. If it's coming straight towards you, that means cover it up with the barrel so you can't see it and pull the trigger. If it's circling from side to side, you want to swing from behind the bird up in front of it and shoot out ahead of it so that it flies into where that shot cloud is and you can hit the head and neck and get a good clean kill. Once you do all of that, don't pause to celebrate. Don't stick your hands in your pockets and take a drink of coffee. You have to go pick up that bird. It's important to recover your birds as quickly as you can so that you don't lose them. Maybe they fall into cover and you lose track of them. But I've seen lots and lots of ducks get up and swim away or fly away after they've been shot and they hit the water. And so you want to get on top of those birds as quickly as you can, or you're going to lose them, or they're going to be crippled somewhere and you won't be able to find them. A couple of notes for that. If you hunt with a dog or you hunt with somebody that has a dog, dog takes care of that for you. It's great. But even with a dog, sometimes birds will hit the water and they'll still be alive. You see them flapping around or swimming, or their head will poke up and they'll be looking around. If you can do so safely, take a chance and shoot that bird on the water again. Typically people call that swatting. So shoot it on the water and make sure it's dead before you go get it or before you send the dog after it. If you are hunting with a dog, you're going to shoot on the water. Before you do, make sure that the dog is not already chasing the bird. Even very seasoned gun dogs, if they see a bird flailing around the water, are probably going to go get it, even if they should be staying steady. So it's your responsibility if you're hunting with the dog to make sure that you're not putting that in an unsafe situation. So you get all of those factors together, you make a clean shot. Make sure you do the ethical thing and go get that bird as quickly as you can so that it doesn't float away or swim away or fly away and ruin everybody's hunt. Let's talk a little bit about decoys. I already said this, but leave room for the ducks to land. This is a decoy spread that I hunted over last year in North Dakota. And we've got our Canada goose decoys set about 6 feet apart and the ducks 6 to 10 feet apart, kind of spread all around this whole area. So it looks like there's a lot of activity, but anywhere that a bird would want to land, there would be room for them to get in between those birds. And then we left patches of open water in front of us where we wanted the birds to go. Use blocks of decoys to stop ducks. This is especially helpful if the wind is going from right to left or left to right across in front of you. Because those birds are going to be coming in from one side or the other. You want them to stop in front of you. If you're hiding in some kind of cover and they're flying right at you, they're going to stop anyway. But if they're flying crossways and you put a big block of ducks, chances are if they're going to land on those birds, they're going to land in front of them rather than flying over all of your decoys and landing on the other side. So you can set up a big block of decoys and a few out in front of you, and that'll get those birds to stop right in front of you. Motion can be really important to decoy spreads. It adds realism. It makes them look lifelike. That can be as simple as if you're hunting in a lot of cover and you're not going to be seen, you can kick the water with your foot and create ripples, and those decoys will bob around a little bit. That's a common tactic for timber hunting, if you're hunting in flooded timber. I use what is called a jerk cord, which you can buy for pretty cheap or even build yourself with a bungee cord. But essentially you have an anchor and a piece of elastic cord that is then tied to some decoys, and then another cord that you take with you to where you're sitting to hunt. When you pull on that, the decoys will swim towards you, and when you let go, the elastic cord tightens back up and they swim back the other direction. So that adds a kind of a realistic swimming motion, and it's relatively cheap. You can buy motion decoys with spinning wings or decoys that swim and sputter and splash around. Those are expensive. And then you got to worry about batteries and charging them and carrying extra stuff with you in the field. I do hunt with motion decoys sometimes, but that old-fashioned jerk cord is hard to beat. And for someone that's just starting out, that's a lot more intuitive to understand, and it's cheap. Make it look natural. If you've been scouting and seeing how ducks swim around, try to duplicate that. Decoy variety can help with this. If you have a dozen mallards, you can buy 6 of another species and kind of splash them in and mix it up. You can get feeder decoys that look like the rear end of a duck sticking up out of the water when it's dipping underwater to get some food. Those usually come in 2 packs, and you can get those really cheap. $20 gets you a couple of decoys. And even just adding those 2 decoys will add some realism. It makes it look like ducks are feeding around in the water, and it can really help. And most ducks will decoy 2 mallard decoys. So if you're going to buy one kind of decoy, buy mallards. Because mallards are the most abundant duck in North America, and most ducks were probably raised on a wetland listening to mallards call to each other, and so they're going to be comfortable around mallard decoys and comfortable around mallard duck calls. So that's your key. You want to make most of your decoys mallards and mix in a few other things here and there. This is an example of a pretty common setup if the wind is at your back. You've got blocks of decoys on either side in kind of a U shape. They thin out in the middle and leave a big old landing zone in the middle for birds to land. If I set up like this, I throw my jerk cord out right in the middle. So I've got 1 or 2 ducks that kind of swim back and forth in the open area. And that mimics how a duck would land in the middle and then swim out to the edges where its friends are. If the wind was blowing from left to right, I would take about half of the decoys on the right side of the spread and put them in that bottom left corner and fill in that gap. So that as birds are flying in from the right, there's a few decoys out in front of the blind, but there's a big block that they're not going to fly over, and they're going to land right in the middle. This is where we're probably going to spend most of our time with this presentation, is duck ID. I already mentioned duck limits are set by species. You may shoot 6 ducks total, but certain species you can only shoot certain numbers. So it's very important to know what you're shooting before you shoot it. So I've got pictures that we'll go through, but typically what you're going to look for is the wing coloration on a bird. Almost every duck can be identified from its wing alone. And as they're flying around, that's what you're going to try to look for. When you have a duck in hand and you're not sure what it is, the feet and bill color can help differentiate between some of the hens that look very much alike, that don't have the full color. If you're not sure what a duck is, I don't recommend shooting it, though you are allowed to shoot at least one of every kind of duck, but you don't want to end up in a situation where you shoot something that you can only shoot one of first thing in your hunt, because then you may not be able to confidently shoot any more ducks the rest of the day if you're not able to positively ID them. So generally, it's good practice to make sure that you know what a bird is before you pull the trigger. That's why it's so important to stay hidden and to get your decoy spread just right and get those birds in really close so you can see them. There are, in general, 2 types of ducks in North America: dabbling ducks and diving ducks, sometimes called dabblers and divers. Dabblers are your standard pond ducks, your mallards, teal, wood ducks, etc. They like shallow water. They don't typically dive all the way under the water to feed like a diving duck does. And dabblers are much more likely to get out and walk around on land, whether that's to nest or to feed or to take a nap in the grass at the edge of the pond. Diving ducks tend to live in deeper water. In Missouri, that's our reservoirs, our lakes, our big rivers like the Missouri, and their body shape is a little bit different. Their feet are further back on their body, which helps them swim better. It also makes them really bad at walking on land. And so as ducks are flying around, you can kind of see from the body shape, oh, this is a dabbler or a diver, or based on the habitats that you're hunting, make an educated guess as to what you're likely to see. And that kind of narrows down your duck ID before you even get started. We're going to go over some common Missouri ducks with some pictures here in a second. But before we do, I want to highlight some resources. The MDC waterfowl webpage is where I pulled all these pictures from. So you can go to the Missouri Department of Conservation website and look at their waterfowl ID tips. Every year they publish a migratory bird hunting digest that has all the regulations in it and has bird ID tips. Those are free, and you can pick them up anywhere you get your permits, any MDC facility that has literature that they give out. Be a great place to grab one or two of those, stick them in your car, stick them in your blind bag, in your stuff that you're going to take out in the field, so you have that reference guide. Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl, their websites have really extensive ID quizzes and tools to help you learn to ID ducks. And the Ducks Unlimited app is a very helpful tool when you're in the field, because you can pull up pictures and examples of ducks and make sure you know what you're looking at. Also in the off season, or if you're just practicing, you can go birding. Drive around your wetland areas and watch these birds through your binoculars. Instead of them flying at you at 50 miles an hour and you having to make a split-second decision as to what kind of bird this is, watch them swim around and get up and fly and see how their body shape looks as they move and where exactly those colors are on those birds. That'll help you identify them later down the road. And as silly as it sounds, look at your decoys. Decoys typically have a pretty realistic paint job, and those will also help you identify where the colors are on the different types of birds and what to look for when you have them in hand. These are mallard ducks. These are the most abundant ducks in North America. They're one of the largest ducks in North America, and they're one of the most sought after birds for table fare and for sport. You may shoot in Missouri 4 mallards, but only 2 may be female. On top we have the drake, the male, and on the bottom the hen, the female. So this is the only species where you can only shoot a certain number of hens. So you do need to know the difference between a hen and a drake. Fortunately, that's usually pretty clear. Mallards are very big. They decoy very well. They call loudly. They are pretty easy to identify. But as those birds are coming in, you hear the quacks, and you look for that blue color on their wing. That's going to be your key identifier, as well as the green head, the chestnut breast on the drakes. And so you look for that darker color bird. Ideally, you want to shoot drakes, so you don't have in a situation where you have to avoid shooting hens if you've already shot 2. Pintails, another very sought after duck in Missouri. I still need to double check the regulations for this coming season because this has changed each year over the last few years as their population fluctuates. But last year you could only shoot 1 pintail. And I believe that's the same this year, but again, I need to double check that. And you should too. You should check everything I'm saying about limits before you go out into the field and make sure that you verify that for yourself. Pintails are a beautiful duck, especially the male that you see on the bottom with the white belly, the brown head, and then the sprig tail. If they're fully colored up, they're very easy to identify with that white body. But the way you identify pintails is their long, slender neck and their wings look like they're gently swept back, gently curved back. They have sort of a delicate shape to them, which sounds a little bit subjective, but as you see a lot of birds flying around, you'll be able to recognize that kind of sleek, long neck of the pintail, and even on the hens, you'll be able to identify those readily. These are gadwalls. Again, we have the drake on the bottom and the female on the top. Gadwalls you can shoot 6 of, so you don't need to keep track of hens versus drakes or anything. The key identifier here is the white patch on the backside of the wing. Of course, when you have a drake in hand, they have that brilliant brown color on the top of their wings, and so that could be another good way to identify them. If you have a female gadwall in hand, the way you would tell that from a female mallard would be that the coloring on the wing is white and not blue. And so if you're trying to tell if it's a mallard or a gadwall flying around, look for that blue color on the wing and to know that it's a mallard. Widgeon. Widgeon are more of a western duck, though you will see them in Missouri for certain. Another one where there's no limit on the number of widgeon that you can kill. You can kill 6. Their white patch on the leading edge of the wing of the drakes is going to be the key thing that you're looking for there. And then on the females, they're going to have a small white patch on the wing, which doesn't differentiate them a whole lot. But you can look for where that white is positioned, where that's kind of in the middle of the wing versus the very back. And that is some green coloring on the wings on the female, but that can be a little bit harder to pick out than the bright blues or bright whites that we see in other species. When you have them in hand, they're similar in size to a pintail. And so if you're confused between this as a pintail hen or a widgeon hen, look at the bill. These birds, they will have a blue or gray bill with a black tip, whereas a pintail will have, pintail hen will have more of a mottled kind of slate gray color without that black tip. Wood ducks, very common duck in Missouri. This is one of the species that breeds here. You are, I believe, only allowed to shoot 3 of them, and they are pretty easy to identify. They're a little smaller than some of the other big ducks. They have kind of a shrieking whistle call that they will do when they're flying. That is very distinct. They have, of course, the crest on top of their head in both the males and females, and they have white coloring around the eyes, very pronounced in the females. And then their tail. You see how their tail kind of flares out almost like the bill on a crankbait. So there's a lot of characteristics you can use to identify a wood duck. Wood ducks do tend to fly very early, very thin, very first light, and they'll come and just plop in your decoys out of nowhere. And so they'll come in close, and you see them swimming in your decoys. You look for that white coloring around the eye for the hen, you look for the crest on the head for the drake, and then you know what you're dealing with. Common or northern shovelers. This is another species of which you can kill 6. The key identifier here is the blue color on the leading edge of the wing and the very large beak. The beak is unmistakable. So if you see any bird flying around and it's got a laughishly large beak, and you know that that's a shoveler. They're a lot of fun to hunt. They tend to decoy pretty well. I think partially because some hunters prefer not to shoot them, thinking that they don't taste very good. I think they taste just fine. And like I said, they are fun to hunt because they like to decoy. Plus, I think their beaks are so big when they turn their head down to look at your decoys, their face gets caught in the wind and it just pulls them right in. So they can be fun to hunt, but look for that blue coloring on the wing is your key identifier there. Another species that looks like that is the blue-winged teal, which is smaller than a shoveler and lacks the large bill. You probably won't see blue-winged teal during normal waterfowl season, but you will during teal season, which is coming up this next weekend, because they're very early migrants. They don't like cold weather, so they tend to head south pretty quick. Other characteristics to look for that set them apart is the black color that goes right through the eye on their face. That can be a little bit hard to see unless they get very up close, but fortunately teal tend to decoy pretty close and you can get a good look at them. These are green-winged teal. They are even smaller than the blue-winged teal. They're one of the smallest ducks in North America. They're also the second most abundant duck in North America. So you will see a lot of these during the entire waterfowl season in Missouri. They taste good. They're fun to shoot because they fly quickly and acrobatically, and it can be a challenge. And they're beautiful little birds. Look for the green color on the back of their wing, the white underwing, as well as the very obvious red and green head on the drakes for those. Typically, you would identify teal based on their small size, their fast and erratic flying style. Those were all dabbling ducks. We now get into some diving ducks. You can see from these drawings a little bit that the feet are further back on the body, the wings are a little bit further back on the body. They're just a slightly different shape. As you watch a lot of birds fly around, you'll get used to making that distinction. On top, we have a canvasback. On the bottom, we have redheads. These are probably the two that you're most likely to get mixed up. And it's important that you be able to identify them because they do have different limits between those two species, which you will need to look up because I don't remember them off the top of my head. But the canvasback, the key identifier there is the long sloped bill. It almost looks like they have a triangle shaped head. And with a redhead, they have obviously a rounder head, a slightly different wing shape, and they have that white ring around the end of their bill. So these can be difficult, especially with the hens, to tell apart in the air. Look for the white underwing on canvasbacks and a slightly darker color underwing on the redheads. Look for that head shape if you can get a really close look at them and be confident. And then that's the really key identifier, is the shape of their heads. These are these are hooded mergansers. They don't taste very good, and a lot of people will tell you not to shoot them. You can only shoot 2, so if you decide you think they look cool and you want to kill one, Remember that if you kill it, you eat it. That is a legal requirement as well as an ethical responsibility. So if you're not sure you like the taste of wild game, maybe stay away from these. I think they taste fine. Certainly not as good as other ducks, but I am willing to eat them. So I do shoot them from time to time. But the key identifiers here that you're looking for are the crest on the head with the drakes. It's got that bright white patch, and then the black and white pattern on the wings. These are some of the last diving ducks we're going to get to here. These are ringneck ducks. Notice the black and white. They've got the white on the back of their wings and black on top of their body, white underneath. If you have one in hand, especially if you're trying to tell the hens apart from other species, look for those two white rings on the bill, and that's going to help you tell them apart. They look a lot like bluebills or scaup. There's actually two species of scaup, greater and lesser scaup. But the key difference here is the light color on top of the scaup versus the ringneck that's not going to have that lighter color on top. Bluebills or scaup are more limited in how many you can harvest than the ringneck. So make sure you get if you've seen small black and white diving ducks flying around, make sure you get a close look at them before you harvest any of them. We're coming up on when I would like to end my talk, so I will rush through some teal hunting strategies here, which is teal. We talked about identification. Teal are small ducks. Blue-winged teal migrate very early, so there is a limited season on them that starts September 11th and runs 2 weeks and then a couple days, I believe. Again, scout. Make sure you go out and look and see if birds are using an area before you go hunt it. You'll save yourself a lot of time. When you're scouting, look for shallow water and small pieces of water that have food. Anything with flooded vegetation this time of year is going to be good food source for those birds. They will either feed on the seeds or on the insects that are feeding on the vegetation. So that's going to be what you're looking for. And you can shoot teal out of a ditch or a puddle, whereas with a lot of other ducks, you need to find a little bit more water. If there's a nice cold front that comes through, that's going to push more birds down south. So if you hunt the opener, and a lot of those birds are going to get scattered out by hunters, but then if the next week it's going to turn off cold again, that's a really good time to get out there again because there'll be some fresh birds coming into the area. For teal, you don't need many decoys. If you do buy teal decoys, the nice thing is they're light because they're small, and you can add those into your regular duck season mix without having to carry a lot of extra gear. So that is a good investment, but you can definitely shoot teal over mallard decoys. You don't need more than a dozen. You probably don't need more than 6. And this is the time that I do recommend using spinning wing decoys if you're willing to make that investment, because teal, for whatever reason, seem to land very close to those spinning decoys. It really helps bring them in close. Again, be very confident in your duck identification. I said we were going to spend a lot of time on that, and we did. We're about to spend some more time on it because in regular duck season, or big duck season, as we call it sometimes, you can shoot at least one of anything. That is not true in teal season. You can only shoot teal. Blue-winged teal are typically what you're going after, but green-wing and cinnamon teal are also open to hunting during teal season. If you shoot a cinnamon teal, call me, because that's pretty unlikely. That's a duck that tends to live in Mexico and in California. But I have seen them in Missouri, so it is theoretically possible. So you want to be very confident in your identification. Typically, you are going to see wood ducks or shovelers that will also be around during teal season. Wood ducks because they breed here and they haven't yet migrated out, and shovelers tend to migrate pretty early. Along with some other ducks, sometimes pintails migrate early. So be very confident in your ID. It's pretty easy to tell a wood duck and a teal apart. A wood duck is slightly larger and they have that flared tail, as well as the crest on their head and the white patch on the face, whereas a teal is going to have a black patch on the face. The wood ducks do have blue on their wings, but it's not the same color, and it's not nearly as apparent when they're in flight as the blue patch on a blue-winged teal. But if you're not sure, don't shoot. Get a real good look. Chances are teal will circle around again and land in your decoys. They like to do that. So if you're not sure, don't shoot the first time, and it very likely will come back, and you'll get another look at it. Because you don't want to shoot an illegal bird on accident. During teal season, shooting time opens at sunrise rather than a half hour before sunrise. During big buck season and almost every other hunting season, you can start shooting a half hour before sunrise. So if you're used to doing that, it's going to feel like you're waiting too long to start shooting during teal season. But the reason that is there is to give you extra light to identify those birds and tell them apart. And it's very important that you adhere to this rule because one, I can't tell a teal apart from a wood duck right at a half hour before sunrise. And, under certain circumstances, if they're calling, maybe you can, but it's really important to make sure that you know what you're shooting at. And that gives you the extra chance to do that. Plus, if you're hunting in an area where there are other hunters and some of you may have had this experience where people start shooting early, it messes up the hunt for everybody else. I've had birds swimming around in my decoys, waiting a few minutes for shooting light. Someone else starts shooting, those birds get up and leave. And somebody else breaking the law cost me my hunt as an ethical hunter. So make sure that you adhere to that rule. That's something that the conservation agents are pretty strict about enforcing, is because they know that that's a rule that tends to get broken. So keep that in mind. Be real sure of your ID. Give those birds a chance to let you double check, because teal tend to circle around a lot, and you should have a confident season. I see. It looks like we had some questions in the chat. I had not been reading along with those, so Colton, I think we got some time for questions.
Yeah.
Oh, these are not questions. These are Colton providing links.
That's all right. Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Zach. That was wonderful. As someone new to waterfowling in general, there was a lot of great info there.